Awesome, perfect. So, all right, welcome back everyone to another Prepare Like a Pro lecture. Today I wanted to show two of my games, an aggressive approach against the English opening. So, many of you might know about this move, but the English opening has been increasingly popular lately, I would say. Especially at the Grandmaster level. And the reason being that probably because the E4 and D4 responses are getting a lot of repetitive lines, and sometimes white wants to play something a little bit more interesting and keep it as flexible as they can. So C4 is very common, and I have some ideas that might be interesting, maybe not in the main lines, but definitely in some of the side lines that I have faced myself in practice. So yeah, I said two games, and I will get started. So both of those games will be starting with the move E5. I have played this basically throughout my lifetime. Many players can prefer other lines like knight F6, E6, or E5, which is what I played, or something like C5, C6, or many other lines possible. But E5 is basically playing the reversed Sicilian, and this is very important to kind of understand, because we already declare that we want to play something sharp rather than something dull. My opponent played knight C3, I played knight F6, and this is a game I played, I forgot to mention, against I believe FIDE master Seth Homa in the World Open, and I don't remember the exact year, but if I scroll down I can see it, it's 2021, which is correct. So here my opponent played G3, and there are other alternatives for white, such as the move, I don't know, E3, knight F3, mainly played, like for example knight C6, G3, and black can respond with D5, playing some sort of a Sicilian, more like a reversed dragon, with colors of course switched up. But there is also an interesting line against that, which has been appearing more and more recently, that I want to show. Here black can actually play this move E4, although it looks like a very premature attack, and white can play knight G5 to attack this pawn. Black simply and surprisingly plays this move C6, and their idea is, if allowed, they want to play D5 and defend this pawn. And the idea after takes, black goes D5. So black actually sacrifices a pawn in return to get some initiative immediately with the pieces. And if they play something like knight H3, knight G3, sorry, I think black even responds with the move H5. And I will just double check that we are on the correct territory, and I'm looking at the games in this position, and it confirms that this position has been played many times at the top level. And it's a very unique way of playing, because after white responds with E3, black can simply go H4, and this position is very exciting, I would say, to play with black already out of the opening. So this is one way to play, but of course my opponent didn't play knight F3, so we're going to go all the way back to move number 3. So C4, E5, knight C3, knight F6, and here my opponent played G3, kind of dodging all of those lines. And I have been playing this line pretty much very regularly myself, so I played D5, CD5, knight D5, bishop G2, knight B6, and here my opponent played E3. I played knight C6, and my opponent played knight G to E2. And this is probably the a critical moment, I would say, of the game, because there are many ways to play here with black, but I think I have a very concrete choice of what I would like to play with the black pieces. So I'm going to, I guess, ask the chat and also the in-person audience, what would you play here with the black pieces? So, and a question in the chat is, after cd5, does c6 pawn sacrifice? Does c6 pawn sacrifice sound? So I'm guessing you're referring to the previous line and you want to sacrifice. I mean, you're referring to the pawn sacrifice. If it's sound, it is sound. Yeah, that line is actually. Oh, you mean after? Oh, you're asking here if you can play c6. I don't think so. This is too much. I mean, I know the title is saying aggressive way, but I don't want to sacrifice pawns just like that, you know. So I get the point. It's in the spirit, but it's preferable if we back it up with some compensation. Like in the other one, we're chasing the knight or something. In this case, it's a little premature. Okay, so Smith-Morra colors reversed. Yes, but you don't get the same number of opportunities, I would say, because Smith-Morra, you are already down a pawn, so black can, if they know what they're doing, they can equalize. And here you're down a tempo and a pawn. It's probably not going to work out, right? So is black to play here? I am curious about what the suggestions will be. Of course, probably if I'm asking, I'm giving away a lot of things, but let's just see if
would you play knight to b4?
You can play knight b4, but what's your idea with knight b4? You want?
I want the d3 square is very soft. I thought maybe you could exploit g3.
Yeah. So also in the chat, knight b4 is suggested. So if I go knight b4, what I'm slightly worried about is my opponent will just castle, and if I try something like this, which feels like it's in the spirit of position, I am slightly worried because I am trying to do something there, but my opponent might just block me and kind of shut my bishop down. And if I just go somewhere else, I'm just wasting too much time giving up the control of the center. So I probably don't want to go bishop f5. So maybe I want to jump knight to d3. But what next? After I achieve knight on d3, I doubt I want to take this bishop because I just played 1, 2, 3, and potentially 4 moves to capture something that has never moved, while I have my bishops waiting, my king uncastled, and I've just been moving with the knight chasing something. And here, in fact, my opponent can start launching an attack on the king side and the center. And this is probably not something I want with a king that is not fully developed yet. So knight b4, knight d3 is very tempting, but if I am in time, I should be doing such things. But yeah, it's an interesting idea for sure, I would say. Any other suggestions? Also, it was the suggestion in chat, so I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. Also, now that I'm thinking, after knight b4, white can also play d4, not even allowing any jumps on knight on d3, because if bishop f5, there's e4. So unfortunately, we wouldn't be achieving too much, and after a3, we would be kicked out. Bishop c5 is suggested. That is an interesting move, controlling the d4 square. I guess it's possible, yeah. They would castle, and we would castle, and the game would probably go on like this. It's definitely an alternative. That is not what I went for. There are actually very similar ideas. Instead of bishop c5, I have played this move in my life before, after castles. This is something I have played, but after f4, I wasn't really fully enjoying these types of positions, because my opponent, after takes very nicely got a center, and although the game ended in a draw, I was still not happy to give up the center like that. So over the course of years, I actually, as the theory also developed, I adopted the following move, h5. The idea being, I simply want to play h4 and potentially take here if the king is there, or maybe just go h3 and try to restrict this bishop on g2. So here my opponent responded with the move h3. You might be curious about why not h4, but as soon as you put your pawn on h4, you are somewhat weakening this g4 square, which means that I can pretty much anytime play my bishop to g4. I am very rarely scared of you playing f3, because now you just shut down your bishop for no good reason, and the moment you commit to something like f4, I can always just put back my bishop and it will be just untouchable. I'm just showing this as an example, not as a move-by-move forced line, but that's kind of something interesting. And also, the moment you put your pawn on h4, you're always subject to attacks like g5 in the long run, especially if you want to castle short. So that's why my opponent played the move h3 in this position. Okay, so we started with the h-pawn. I think we have to continue with the h-pawn. It makes just enough sense. And after my opponent plays g4, I think this is another interesting move, and this kind of shows how computers actually changed chess, because in the older times, I would say, it's very rare you would see players go h5, h4, and then even my next move. I think my next move probably would be evaluated as a strategic error maybe like 20, 30 years ago, but now it actually makes a lot of sense since the computers just approve the play. So what would you play here with black? And I will definitely say why I think it would be considered a strategic mistake, although I think it's not, but it's my personal preference rather than anything else.
Would you play f5?
Absolutely, f5. Since we started the kingside attack early, we should actually just go for it completely. And the reason I say this would be considered a strategic mistake is now I have completely gave up this control of the e4 square, and I have actually a somewhat isolated pawn in the middle of the board, because I cannot control this square by any means. And therefore, anytime my opponent can take advantage of this, it will actually be a problem. So my opponent played the move d4 here. I captured. They captured with the knight. I captured again, and they took with the pawn. So now the e4 square is not really a deal, but it's more like my king is getting opened up. And also I have a pawn that is hanging in the position, and I have to take care of some things here. So let's think about it. What would we play here with black? Someone in the chat says your opponent had no chance of beating you. His elo is lower than yours, right? I mean, I just translated that in a nice way. Well, I mean, you shouldn't just look at the rating, right? It's not only about the rating. It's more about the day and how you're feeling and all that. But I appreciate the confidence in my abilities. But I respect everyone and their ratings, so I don't judge opponents by ratings. All right, so it's black to play. I am seeing c6. I am seeing queen e7. So let's discuss them. I don't like queen e7 as much, because after bishop e3, now I am no longer able to develop my bishop comfortably because my queen is blocking. I do, however, have the opportunity to castle long, but there is a drawback to this move, and I hope that it's going to be obvious after I show the move. Queen to f3, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn, and I am not very happy with my position. Actually, black is probably simply lost here. So I cannot do that, although I urgently want to castle since my king is in the middle of the board. So queen e7 was out of the question for me, especially because after this, and if I play something like c6, I'm still not having the best position ever, because my opponent can castle long or short, get a rook to the e file, and my queen and my king, they're aligned. Although I will be castling long in no time, I still don't feel safe and definitely not active enough. C6 would definitely be a good move or natural move, but the only concern I think I had in the game is it being not super fast enough. I just thought that I don't value this pawn on b7 enough to waste my time with c6, which is usually my strategy when I'm playing dynamic chess. Ideally, if I can just get away with giving up pieces and just continue developing, that's what I will do. So I played bishop e7. What's my idea? I simply want to castle, and I don't really mind my opponent taking on b7. So of course I was kind of provoking my opponent to take, but now I have to kind of justify my reasoning here. So I guess if I ask what would you play in this position, everyone will find the move, but I will still do it. So what would you play here with black? Which probably has a reason behind me asking, and hence no one will ever suggest rook b8, but I did not play rook b8, which would probably be the most natural move because your rook is being attacked. But the chat is right. They are saying castle, which is what I did, sacrifice the rook, give up everything in the name of attacking your opponent. And if I move the rook, they are rightly so saying bishop c6 check, and my castling rights might be damaged, but also I don't want to retreat. I don't like retreating in chess. This is the last thing I like to do, so I would rather give up a pawn and the rook than retreat. This is the player I always wanted to be, and that's kind of the way I'm playing. Is this sound? The sacrifice is actually approved by the computer, so I think that is the first question to be answered. Does it actually make sense tactically? It does. Do I remember every single idea? Not really. But yeah, this is actually pretty good. So just let's see what happens after he goes rook g1. I don't quite remember, but I think I can just take here, I think. And then I just want to put the bishop on f6 if you try to do something, and I'm defending everything, and I have an outside passed pawn, and my opponent is underdeveloped, as the chat is mentioning, so this is full compensation. In fact, I will actually take a peek at the computer analysis to see what's the eval of this current position. It started at +1 point something, and it went all the way straight down to 0-0, which, considering I'm looking at the computer, doesn't surprise me. And I actually remember correct. Rook g1 and bishop takes h3 is the first line of the computer, and the computer doesn't disappoint by giving 0-0 everywhere, even though I was feeling very confident that I had a very good position at this moment. So in the game, my opponent did not take my my rook and played the move bishop to e3. So I played rook b8 now, so there is no more check on c6, so I can finally confidently play rook b8. My opponent retreated their bishop back, and here I played a nice move, I would say. So I will just give it back to the chat. What would you play here with black?
Knight c4.
So knight c4 is a very tempting move, but there is a flaw to it, unfortunately. Yes, it's pointed out in the chat, but I will give you a chance to find the flaw of that move. So what is the drawback of knight c4? It kind of vacates this square. So if I do that, I will unfortunately be losing the knight. So there is actually this funny thinking mechanism in chess, which is saying that whenever you make a move, you actually let go of the control of some square. And this is guaranteed. Like, even if it's a random move, even if you castle short, for example, your king no longer controls this square, or like your rook doesn't control the h-file. So like every single move has a drawback. Whether it's good or not, it doesn't mean sometimes much, but in this scenario that logic actually works. So knight c4 would actually vacate this square and that would lose. So I see the chat suggested by Dennis in the chat, queen d7. Why did I play queen d7? Well, let's understand. If you were playing with the white pieces in this situation, what would you do? And probably, generally speaking, you would like to castle. So I play queen d7, anticipating my opponent castling short, and then I would just take on h3. And I would just be on top. So I don't want to waste too much time on this game, so I will go a little bit faster because there is one more game, and I think that's my favorite game on this opening. So I just wanted to show this idea of sacrificing the rook, playing some compensation, h5, h4, but the rest of the game actually played out, I would say, quite nicely for me. So my opponent played queen e2. I immediately saw a file opportunity, a battery opportunity on the e file, so I played rook e8 with the idea maybe to go bishop g5 if I need to, and maybe somehow prepare this knight c4, not immediately, to put some pressure on the bishop on e3. So my opponent played rook d1. Of course, keep in mind, my opponent cannot castle short. The h3 pawn is hanging. So they have to solve that issue. And also, if they castle long, well, I would be a little afraid because now the b file is completely open and anything is possible on the b file. So they have to be always watching out for some discovery of this knight. And of course, there's bishops coming, and nobody wants to deal with that. So my opponent just played rook d1, just simply getting the rook out of the way, and I played bishop g5. Keep in mind, they cannot still castle. Played queen f3, and it was at this moment I kind of took, and played rook f8. So I am still not allowing them to play castles. Why? Because if they castle, I actually can make use of the f file by playing bishop d3. Dennis is saying, could rook b to e8 be better? So your suggestion is, could this move be better? You are saying rook b e8. It could be better, but I am also anticipating my opponent from castling, and I want to bluff him on the b file at least. Not bluff, I mean I'm just having an activity on the b file. So arguably, after seeing the game, maybe my rook should have belonged to f8, but my opponent doesn't necessarily have to play the exact same moves they did. So the situation required me to go back to f8, and I can potentially play rook b8, be8 now, given that I have the option of doing that. So actually in the game, my opponent played rook d2, and then I played rook b8. So castles is not an option still, because I have bishop d3, attacking the queen, attacking the rook, and there is no good move for my opponent. This doesn't do anything. This is not possible because the knight defends. I win an exchange, and then I will slowly win the game. So rook b8, my opponent castled. I did actually play bishop d3. And they did end up sacrificing the queen for a rook and a bishop, and they also have a pawn, but this is just not enough in terms of compensation, because my pieces are going to get coordinated in no time, which they did. I played knight d5, and I just moved around a little bit. I'm preventing my opponent from playing e4, as I will meet that with knight f4, and then I was allowed to enter and created sufficient play. I will just go till the end, but here white just doesn't have enough counterplay towards my pieces, and I just collected everything. Couple more moves and they just resigned because the knight is hanging. So that was it for this game. Of course, there can be a lot of discussion after my opponent sacrificed the queen, but I think the pressure was just getting to them and they couldn't figure out. And of course, time was ticking too. Time is a factor in an actual game. Time is ticking, pressure is there, the rooks are looking at you, and that's why they were like, okay, I'm gonna sack the queen and hope that my minor pieces can do something, but it's not enough. Once you get some play with the queen and the knight, they are super well coordinated, and that would just be over. So now we're gonna go and see my next game, which is definitely my most favorite game in this opening. I will just flip the board and kind of discuss it. So we're talking about the English opening. And if you have missed it also, I see in the comments, missed 30 minutes, you can always watch the first 30 minutes the next day. So that should be completely fine. And in this game, my opponent played this very lesser played move, d4. The main moves in this position are e3, g3, even d3, a3, and e4. All of these moves are played a lot compared to move d4. But when I was preparing against my opponent, I actually saw that he is a very strong correspondence chess player at the same time. And correspondence chess is basically the type of chess where you are allowed to use computer software to play the game. Both parties actually can use computer, but they also need a human insight sometimes, as it's not just computers by themselves. And also keep in mind, my opponent is a regular Grandmaster. So unlike the last game, this game I am playing a Grandmaster, so I have to be very careful. But since this was preparation and I saw that my opponent plays this line, I actually was able to prepare something very sharp and very concrete against the system. Here my opponent took, and I immediately played bishop b4. And this is of course the most played move also in the computer chess, because I have an engine too and I'm preparing using an engine. So I wasn't shocking my opponent by any means in the earlier stages of the game. In fact, I will probably pull up the opening book just to get an idea of how much it was played. And bishop b4 in the Lichess database has been played 87. This is the masters, like in actual chess games, has been played 87% of the time. So it's actually not a surprise at all. So my opponent plays bishop g5, also the most typical move. And here I played the move h6. And h6 played 82% of the time. So I'm always playing the top moves. Well, you might say, like, okay, you're playing the top moves, he's playing the top moves. How are you even going to get an edge, especially if your opponent constantly plays this line? And this is my literally first time. To be even honest, I didn't know this move existed before I started preparing against my opponent, which is funny. And that's the day of the game. So I don't have too much time, and I have never seen this move in my life. And granted, I know he plays c4, but I can choose from different lines against him. But I have no idea what to do against this, and this is something he plays all the time. So I regardless went for it because I had a very clever idea that I thought would have worked. And if I'm showing the game, it's clearly worked. Right? So bishop b4, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, and here was the critical moment of the line. And I'm trying to remember the nuances here. It is black to play, and I didn't play the top move of the engine, and not the top move that is played either. So that already started to surprise him a little bit, I would say. So what would you here play with black? And what do you think is the top move even of the engine? Not the engine necessarily, but human play. Because I don't know, the engine might have changed its mind. So suggestion number one is knight e4, but knight e4 would just hang the queen. Although you're still making me think, because knight e4, bishop d8, knight c3 might be your argument, but I think even if they move the queen, actually there's knight d4 here. Hold on a second, that's interesting. Queen d3? Well, there's knight e4. What is this move? There's no way knight e4 works. What?
I was looking at knight e4 too, but I was thinking the same thing. That looks just a little bit too crazy.
This is too crazy. There is no way this works though. Knight c6 is suggested in the chat. No. Knight c6. Okay, actually knight c6. Yeah, good, because the bishop is hanging. So if you take here, I take there. I don't need to be up a queen. Yeah, that's correct. So I can also be up a piece to win the game, especially if they're a grandmaster. So here it's already like, well, what happens if takes? Well, at least we got rid of the knight. Then I can just move the queen. This is over. Yeah, we can't do that. That was okay. That was an accidental adventure, But I respect everyone's moves, so we got to take a look at them. Knight e5 looks interesting. It does look interesting, but it's moving the same piece twice. Maybe I can get away with that argument, but it looks interesting. I guess he can just go e3 though, so defending this pawn. But it's definitely still something that has to be considered. I just don't want to play something like this, you know, because they're gonna take and they're just gonna develop. So there are g5 suggestions in multiple positions. So let's try to look at all of them. So g5 here is possible. So bishop e g3, and I'm gonna guess that whoever suggests g5, they want to jump knight e4 on the next move because they don't want to give up the queen. But after something like rook c1, I'm not sure how I take advantage of the knight being pinned, and of course I also had to consider bishop takes e5 in this position, which almost was missed by me. But I think this position would just be lost for black because I don't have enough pieces simply. And if I go f6 even, there is potentially rook c1, but also this should be sufficient because this is not enough. Opponent is safe, two bishops, I mean knight and bishop versus rook, it's not enough. So knight e5 playing with the same piece, I'm not a huge fan of that. g5, bishop g3, this is I think a variation, definitely played. It was actually played by Giorgadze versus Mikhail Tal in 1974. So that shows you that this line actually exists. And if knight e4, I guess white just goes queen d3, and this was exactly the Tal game. And I think I remember this, checking this line, and here Tal played knight b5, which looks interesting. I don't know if it's necessary though. So this is what they did. Tal did this, and putting pressure there, he eventually won the game. So I wasn't too happy with the earlier g5, and also we have to keep in mind my opponent probably knows what to do after g5. It's kind of too obvious. I am seeing Jared is saying c5 instead. I am not sure at what moment you're referring to c5, but you're probably referring to it in a moment like this. Here c5. But also I'm checking the computer, it says queen b3. Not the computer, but the online database. Almost everyone played queen b3 here, attacking the bishop, probably going a3 next move, even if you go something like a5. So I'm not really a big fan of just giving up the bishop like this. I gave up the bishop pair. I couldn't even ruin the pawn structure. So actually the main line in this position is bishop takes c3. The argument is that black ruins the pawn structure, and then they go knight e5 with the idea to basically play against these weakened pawns. And I guess after e3 this would transpose to the previous thing we were seeing, but the main idea, as far as I have seen from my opponent's games, is actually white plays this move f4, sacrificing the pawn on c4, because if you take on c4, I believe white can continue with some expansion like e4, attacking this guy, trying to go e5, and if this happens, unfortunately, this lecture would not be happening. It would be more like adventure or like aggressive play with white in the English opening. So for this to happen, I shouldn't be allowing any of that. And I don't generally like, although this was the most played, although this is the most played line, I don't usually like to play with the same piece twice or multiple times in reality. So what I did was I actually just simply castled instead of taking the knight on c3. My opponent played e3. I just played rook e8, simply improving my pieces. And here my opponent played rook to c1. And this is basically the critical moment of the game. It is black to play. And this is where basically my preparation deviated it didn't deviate yet, but it will start deviating very soon from the most played line. So it's black to play, and let's see what the general public wants. If my opponent would ever capture on c6, I would have always taken with the b pawn. Take it towards the center and then go d5, and just control the center even more.
Would you play d5 here?
So d5 is also suggested in the chat, and it's a pretty interesting move, I would say. So d5, if I take, your idea is probably to take and get to a position that we sort of discussed. And I would say it kind of makes sense. I just don't know how to proceed after bishop e2. I guess that brings us to the point they should have probably taken on c6, but it's very important when should they have done it, because their last move was rook c1. So maybe after, if they took on c6 here, maybe it's a good idea to first throw in bishop takes c3 check and then take like this, so that their pawn structure is also ruined. I might do something like this, go d5. But in the game, if I played d5, knight takes, and then bishop e2, I rarely want to take on c3, because now they can take with the rook, and I'm not fully satisfied, at least with the opening outcome. So I didn't want to do that, but I think d5 is actually played. No, d5 is not quite played a lot, but yeah, it's definitely a move. So here I actually took, they took, and then I played, yeah, someone is suggesting g5 knight e4. Yeah, you can do that too, but I'm not threatening much, right? They can just play this. I don't want to take the bishop ever, because that would just open up the h-file. And they want to cancel. I don't know, I just opened my king too much. I cannot exploit anything, so I don't really like that I did this to myself. So what I did is I took on d4, they took, and here I played the move g5. What majority of the games played, however, is 62%, which is a lot of percent compared to the others, is the move c5. And the idea of all of them was basically to, I mean, I guess do the same thing I did. They go g5, bishop g3, and this is where the roads kind of went different ways. So the most common move in this position, played by almost every single player, is the move d5. And the reason is you just want to do something quick and you want to control the center, and it makes a lot of sense. But this wouldn't be a surprise to my opponent, because he would just take on d5. And almost everyone plays queen takes d5. Why? Well, if knight takes d5, white can simply develop bishop b5. And in fact, there is a game of Yasser Seirawan, played in the 1999. I was like 1 year old at that time. And unfortunately, he was on the black side, and he lost the game against Vtachnik, very strong grandmaster. And this would lead to some sort of an endgame. That's kind of what happened in their game, and white eventually won this. But I really don't want to play an endgame. I don't really want to play queen takes d5 either, because after takes, bishop b5, I mean, I'm not so sure I achieved anything out of my preparation, if I even prepared all this. So I had to come up with something different, and this is where my thinking process, as well as using the computer, helped me in this position. So it is black to play, and what would you do with this position? Queen a5 is a suggestion. Well, if you go queen a5, I guess you are not really threatening much, right? I can just develop. I guess you can take, though. So queen a5 is a serious suggestion. Queen a5, and what is our idea if... Okay, I understand what your idea is. If I go a3, you just want to take, and if knight takes or rook takes, you want to jump knight e4. And what's the point if I go here? I'm gonna guess that you definitely want to take on a2 because it's a free pawn. That's a fair argument. Queen b3 might be a nice move though, kind of preventing you from taking the pawn. Yeah, the chat is actually starting to get the move. So as you all saw, d5 led to some trade in the center, and it traded into some sort of endgame. But I really don't want my opponent to take my pawn. I like the idea of d5, but if I really want to get the d5 push, maybe I should actually try to not do that, but go back to the game real quick, which I did it in a different move order. I played g5 first and then c5, and after this here I played the move b5. And the idea of b5 is I'm dynamically responding towards my opponent's center, and I actually want to take on c4. So let's say they play something like bishop e2, I take, they take, and then I go d5 with the idea to go d4. And I can actually create something dynamic in the position. And if they play something like this, there is something like d4, and yeah, that should be just doing great for me, I think. And even if I don't sacrifice, by the way, my position should be incredibly dynamic, and it should be a lot of fun to do it. But I think this is correct. Takes, I can take. I'm even actually calculating if I can do this. Sack the queen, take there, under promote to a knight, check, because your king can only, wait, this is not good. Oh, actually it's good. That's pretty smart. You have to go to a light square. If you go here, that's mate. It's pretty nice. That would be nice. If you go here, I go check, pick up your queen on d8. If you go here, I check you. Unfortunately, bishop b5 check would not help since I can take. So this would be a pretty mate also. I'm just freestyling right now. I'm not even thinking at anything. So maybe this was interesting actually. I think it works out. Although he can take here. That was nice while it lasted. But I guess it doesn't quite work. I mean, it works in the sense that I can take. If you take with the rook, I take on c3, take on e8. If you take with the king, I can go here. I'm attacking these two pieces. So it's still alive. But bishop e2, I'm not very sure what the best move was, but if I remember correctly, something along the lines of queen d6 at some point was right. But I don't remember. Yeah, computer says a3 is the best move, which is what my opponent did. I played bishop a5, and then queen d6 here is the best move, which my opponent didn't play, or bishop e2. Yeah, bishop e2, bc4, queen d6 was the best move to not allow the pawn to go to d5, but this is not really human. It's very difficult to play such moves because you are tempting me to play knight e4, and only then you can play something like queen d5. This is very difficult. A human doesn't usually play moves like queen d6 with the idea to provoke knight e4 and then go queen d5. So my opponent took on b5, but after that it was actually quite simple. I played d5, they played bishop e2, and by the way, they barely had any time left because they tanked for so long. They have never seen the move b5, although they have played this line for so many times. They were in complete shock. And after I played this, they played b4, and it's not so difficult for me to calculate here because I can just simply take and take, and the pin on that knight is just quite brutal, and my opponent just basically started collapsing from this moment onwards. Well, the main problem, I guess, is if you take e takes d4, I can always go knight e4 and gang up on this piece and win it. And if you do queen takes d4, it's not going to be any different. I will just take, and then go knight e4. And then I can just win this knight. My opponent here played bishop f3. I guess it's a nice idea to think about in this position. what would you play here with black? And there is a question in the chat, so let's address that, and then we can go back to the game. So the question is, instead of bishop e2, could white play b4? He definitely could have, but I guess I take, and it's kind of tough to get out of this pin in this situation as well. I am threatening knight e4. Probably your suggestion also works totally fine, but I am trying to remember what my opponent might have missed in the game. I think this is what my opponent actually missed here. He was thinking of playing b4, cb4, ab4, bishop b4, and then queen. Yeah, this is good. This is good suggestion. My opponent was thinking of playing queen d4 here with the idea to actually attack the bishop and then hope to play bishop e2 castles. And thanks for that question, actually. That's great. I almost forgot mentioning this line. But there is a very nice idea here for black to kind of take advantage of the piece placement and to win the game. So how would black win in this position here? Yeah, it's a great line. Not a line, I guess, two moves. Rook e4, very nice. So after rook e4, the queen has to depart somewhere, anywhere, and then I can go d4, and this guy is pinned, and that's game over. So I'm taking advantage of the pin and the pin on many pins, and he cannot do anything in this situation. Even if they go bishop e2 or something, it looks like I cannot take here. That's correct, but I'm pretty sure we can find something like queen a5 here. Just attack the knight multiple times, and that would be the end of the game. So yeah, that was not possible. I think that was the main intention of going c takes b5, but it's just not in time. So this had to happen in the game, and here my opponent played bishop f3. So how do we potentially win in this situation? Yeah, I'm just like double checking the lines, but yeah, it's correct. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure I remember everything right. Bishop c3, rook c3, queen a5. Bishop c3, rook c3, queen a5, but that loses actually to queen takes d4. If you do that, queen takes d4, and that's gonna be end of the game. So I see d takes c3 being suggested, but what do you do after queen takes, rook takes, and then bishop takes a8? What do you do there? So dc3 is interesting, but you are losing the rook on a8, and what would you do in that situation? Queen a5 is another suggestion. So after this, queen a5 is being suggested. But the problem is you are always giving up the pawn on d4. So the moment you play queen a5, you lose this pawn. Okay. So we were talking about dc3, queen takes, rook takes.
Knight e4 maybe, you can block the bishop on f3.
Knight
on c3 is pinned, you can't capture on e4.
Knight e4 in this moment?
Yeah.
So knight e4 is a recommendation. Okay, let's think about that. And if I take with the rook, and now you are saying that I can't take the rook, which is correct.
Yeah, nice pin.
But how about I do that and I pin your pawn towards your queen? So now my idea is if you take with the pawn, I take your queen, and if you take my knight, I actually take, and this time I am taking advantage of the pawn on d4 being pinned, and once again somehow white escaped miraculously. So knight e4 is unfortunately not sufficient either. I think we are right on the track with taking the knight and then taking here, giving up the exchange, but we just have to see a last couple of moves in this position. So c2 is being recommended, and after king e2 I see bishop e6 as a recommendation, which is pretty strong, I would say. But after rook takes c2, we kind of gave up this pawn. Although I would probably still say black is favorable, I still don't see the end of the game just yet. I mean, yes, it's winning. You can go here and you can just grab the pawn at some point and then push your pawn down the board. But to me, that's still work to be done, which I think there is a much more clear-cut way in this position that is in front of us, rather than doing it that way. So rook d2 check, excellent. If king goes up, I have bishop g4 mate. We have seen this mate actually earlier in the game. And after king goes to f1, now it's important. How do we finish the game off? How do we finish off this game?
Then I think bishop e6 works.
Bishop e6 is possible. Yeah, anything is possible actually, but there is a much more simpler move, I guess. Rook d1 is, it's definitely a good move, but opponent goes king e2. And still not the end of the game. Okay, you say rook takes h1. I go rook takes h1. Okay, how is this winning? Show me. Still not resigned. Like, still my opponent has some defense. Okay. So bishop a3 is being suggested. I'm not sure if it's in this position or the initial one. But if you go bishop a3, let's say here, I just go king d2, and if you even promote, then okay, you say bishop a3 before. But this would not be winning. Actually, this would be losing, because, I mean, almost losing. So, as it was suggested, we do not need to rush and try to win in a very quick manner or anything. I can just simply play bishop a3, and I believe it was this position when my opponent resigned, because there is no way out of this position. Even if they take on c2, I just take. I'm up a piece. This is very easy to win, and therefore he resigned. So this game is the game I wanted to show, and it's kind of brilliant because in this position, players like Bareev, Korchnoi, Chernin, Wróblewski, almost all of them, Yasser Seirawan, Van den Doel, and many others, they have played the move d5 here. It was only me and one more player, and that was after me. Actually, no, that was right before me. 1 month before me, played this move b5, and the rest actually followed the trend of playing d5. Played an endgame, and white's scores were quite decent, I would say, in those endgames, because, and actually I'm looking at it, there is only 1-0-1. The rest is like either a draw or 1-0. So that kind of shows how dominant this line kind of was. But after this b5, I don't see anyone ever playing it in the recent years. So I think this line will probably never be repeated. And that should be the end of this line, at least until further notice. So, well, hopefully that was fun to watch. I think that's gonna be the end of the lecture, and thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you all next time. Thank you.